For more on this story now for you, we take you live to Canberra. Joining us is Neil James. He's the Executive Director of the Australia Defence Association. Neil, don't join the ADF. Is that good advice from Ben RobertsSmith?
Well, Ben's going through the wars, excuse the pun, legally, and he obviously feels strongly about a few things. But I think you've got to look this in a broader context. There is a problem between the Departments of Defence and Veterans Affairs and the way that they look after veterans, but the basis of this is actually in the legislation. And you'll have to get the legislation changed to actually fix it. It's not just dependent on whether personalities are doing their job or not.
So you say Ben RobertsSmith is going for the wars. Are you suggesting that we should be sceptical of these allegations that he's making, considering that he has had these war crime allegations levelled against him? We know he strongly denies those allegations. He's actually taking legal action against Nine's papers. But are you suggesting that he could be saying this, that he has some axe to grind with Defence and that we should view his comments in that context?
Not at all. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. There's a lot of pressure on Ben at the moment, and it's understandable that he feels strongly about certain issues. But the particular issue of how we take care of veterans and whether the defence chiefs in particular are responsible for that is really quite a separate issue. The law governing how we look after veterans in this country is unusually complicated, and it's one of the reasons why many people are calling for a Royal Commission. You know, just as with the Disability Royal Commission and the Aged Care Royal Commissions, a Royal Commission might actually get to the basis of some of these problems that seem to fall through legislative cracks and procedural cracks. You've really got to reform the law before you can actually reform how veterans are treated in this country. And I don't think there's any doubt, particularly given the generational fight going on at the moment between the new generation of veterans and previous generations, that something has to be done.
Well, you're right. There are multi-facets to this issue, of course. There is this call for a Royal Commission, as you mentioned, into the suicides of hundreds of serving and former military personnel. That's one branch of it for sure. But when you look at the leadership at the moment, and these are very direct calls here from Ben RobertsSmith, that essentially he's suggesting we need to clear out at the top. Do you think that it is stemming down from the leadership and that some of the problems you just identified would be fixed pretty quickly, as Ben Roberts suggests, if we did have a change of personnel at the top?
Look, I don't think that's the problem at all. I mean, the current Chief of Defence Forces is an ex-Chief of Army. The current Chief of Army is the Deputy Chief of Army. They're both Special Forces officers in their backgrounds. They're the ones that actually initiated all the inquiries into the Special Forces. So the idea that they're somehow involved in a cover-up or seeking to protect their own reputations is absolute nonsense if you know the history of it. You know, this is a very complicated area, and the Inspector General's inquiry has been going on for a long time. It's been going on for too long due to its complexity and difficulty, and obviously it's causing lots and lots of problems across the board, and this is just one of them.
Is it really at the level that Ben RobertsSmith suggests, that we're treating our returning soldiers now as poorly as Vietnam veterans were treated when they returned?
Look, I don't think it's quite got to that stage except in one area, and that's suicide. Obviously the suicide problem is particularly bad, and it's a particularly difficult one to get a grip on because the law doesn't actually let you easily work out how many people are involved and indeed what is the primary cause of their suicide, whether it's their Defence Force service, whether it's post-Defence Force service, or whether it's in many cases a combination of things. You've really got to fix the law before you can fix this problem. And there's no appetite to fix the law within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and that's part of the problem. And the veterans community themselves, remembering the ADA isn't a veterans organisation, is actually split on this issue. A lot of the younger veterans and a lot of the newer veterans organisations are calling for reform, and the RSL and a lot of the more traditional veterans organisations aren't. We really need to sort this out, and in many ways a Royal Commission may be the way to do it, as it's doing with the aged care and disability problems the country faces.
Neil, we've all had cause to be thankful for our defence personnel this week, backing up, of course, the firefighters along the eastern seaboard. We've seen those horrible bushfires. We've seen the Defence Minister this week suggesting there's a possibility for a compulsory call-out for Army reservists to help the ADF response to these sort of bushfires. Is that a good idea? Do we have the capacity to make that happen?
Well, the Army Reserve in particular, and to some extent the other two reserves, have been helping with bushfire fighting for a very long time. Whether there needs to be a compulsory call-out is really an interesting problem, because quite frankly the only reason you do that is under the reserve service protection legislation, to make sure that no boss could sack someone who was called out. We've never done that in peacetime really before. We've always relied on volunteers. We have had compulsory call-outs for service overseas in Afghanistan. It may come to that. We are perhaps not there yet, but it's certainly encouraging that the government and the Defence Force are actively thinking about that. Now, I'm a rural firefighter myself, and I can see how much the rural fire service is under strain at the moment, particularly New South Wales, and all the support they can get from the rest of the country is top-notch.